Hello and welcome to Ladies of Lore, the podcast where we take all of the most wonderful women of mythology and folklore and we unpick, unravel and explore their origins, their stories and how they've changed through time to arrive in today's modern world. I'm India and I'm so grateful to have you here with me today. If you are new to the podcast, welcome on in. I really hope you enjoy it here, and if you do, please feel free to follow or subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. Leave me a little comment or a review if you can, and you can also follow me over on Blue Sky or TikTok. I also have a Patreon where I post little bits and pieces. I actually did just do a write-up on my experience seeing Kendrick Lamar and SZA on their GNX tour and explored the imagery and its historical, social and mythical contexts, which is quite fun. That was fun. But I also do have my exclusive series Heroines of History over on there too, so that is there if you want it. But anyway, on to today, because I'm so excited as I'm once again joined by the exceedingly lovely people from RPG Major.
Hey! Thanks so much for having us back, India.
That's right, they are back. Yeah, we had so much fun last time covering the sirens, and in the words of Dr. Taylor Allison Swift, the crowd was chanting more, and we listened to the crowd around these parts.
Doctor. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Taylor. So the gang is back together again, and we are ready to bring you some more musical fun today. But I'm aware there's quite a lot of you that are new to the podcast that maybe weren't there last time. I haven't got round to listening to that one yet. So I'm thinking, let's do a little bit of an introduction for RPG Major. For those that don't know, RPG Major is an actual play, mystery, RPG and improvised musical theatre podcast. And it's just so much fun. It's just full of amazing music and storytelling. But rather than have me tell you all about it, I'm going to hand it over to RPG Major themselves. Hello, how have you been? Tell us all about you.
Hello. Oh, we are so excited to be here. We are the cast and creators of RPG Major. My name is Camilla.
I'm Lauren.
And I'm Helix.
On the guitar, you may have heard Noah.
Come on, all six strings. Yeah.
We have this serialized tabletop story. Every arc, a new guest comes in with a mystery that relates to mythology, folklore, sort of an urban fantasy setting. And we sing songs and roll dice as we endeavor to solve it and get into lots of trouble.
Yeah, I'll often describe it to people as kind characters living and solving problems in a world full of darkness. It's been so lovely to create this world and to watch these characters. Lauren and Camilla each play a long-running character, and I'll let them introduce those since they're relevant to the topic today, I think. In a world that could use more kindness, these characters are such a breath of fresh air for me to get to interact with. And I'm so happy that we get to join you again, India, as since we last recorded with you, much of what we learned about the sirens from you has found its way into our show's canon as well.
For better or for
that.
worse, with all the sad... No, for so much
I'm
better.
sorry and you're welcome.
Yes. No, it was so... And we are all such big fans of Ladies of Lore. Like, now this is the second time that we've done it. I'm like, I get to hear the intro in real life. I'm like, I've experienced this before. And now I'm like, no, this is the same thing and it's happening. But yes, my character is a siren. Her name is Mara Vertere. And it was so amazing last time, just kind of getting to take a step back and learn so much about what is available to us in this world we've created. But yeah, the last episode was so much fun and I'm so excited to get to do it again.
My character, Aubrey, is a regular human, in theory, but her backstory is sort of a combination of these like Narnia portal stories where a kid falls into a magical world and fairy tales and like the idea of a fairy queen and a fairy court. And so she was a kid who fell into a fairy world, went on adventures for many decades there, became queen, was a magical hero, and then got shunted out and had to go back to start 8th grade. And has been working on finding balance in her life since then. So really a blending of a few different ideas.
There's nothing that these two gal pals can't do. Except
power.
maybe work through their own stuff.
I love it. So now we know who we all are. I'm really pumped to talk about the subject of today's episode, which is fairies. Now, as we now know, this particular topic ties in rather nicely with what's going on over in RPG Major's pod at the moment. So why don't we just... let's crack on. Let's learn about fairies.
Yes.
Let's learn about fairies. Did you guys want to do a little song to to lead us into the origins of fairies?
Yeah.
Sure.
Of course we do.
Setting sail across the ocean, fairy tale, cause of commotion. As the wings they flutter by, faster than a dragonfly. Who knows what the world has set in motion? It's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale.
When you're fluttering by, you do what you must. Whether that's making deals with strangers or sprinkling them with dust. You needed someone enthralled, and so you sing. Or make enchanting patterns in the sky as you take to the wing. It's fairy tale. It's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale.
You might put on your signature glamour, glittering and glistening in the beauty and the splendor. Who knows what we might find in the realms far and wide? It's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale.
I loved it. I remember last time after every song, I'm just like, oh my god, I forgot I'm supposed to actually do something now. Where was I? Talk about fairies. That was really, really good. I love that.
So kind.
On to the origins of fairy. So the word fairy itself derives from the Old French fairy, spelled F-A-E-R-I-E, meaning enchantment, which came to refer both to the state of enchantment and to the beings who caused it. Its deeper etymology is linked to the Latin fatum, meaning fate, indicating their connection to destiny and the unseen threads governing human life. The earliest references to fairy-like beings appear in classical antiquity. In Homer's Odyssey, for instance, Circe and Calypso are sorceresses or divine nymphs who exhibit traits later mapped onto fairy queens. So you've got things like dangerous beauty, otherworldly power, and the ability to shape mortal fate. And Circe and Calypso are among the earliest mythological figures whose traits and narrative roles contributed to the later conception of fairies, and especially fairy queens. Though they're not called fairies in Homeric texts, their attributes and their functions laid the groundwork for what European folklore and medieval romance would develop as the fairy archetype. And what do I mean by that? Well, Circe and Calypso are nymph-like, otherworldly women who live apart from mortal society, ruling their own enchanted realms. Circe in the Odyssey is a powerful sorceress dwelling on her island, capable of transforming Odysseus's men into animals with her potions. She's at once perilous and alluring, embodying that dual nature of fairies in later traditions, beautiful and desirable, but also dangerous and unpredictable. Her magic, tied to nature and transformation, is reflected in the powers of fairy queens who control the lands and creatures under their dominion. Calypso, encountered in the Odyssey as well, keeps Odysseus? You can keep that in. I've stopped editing it. I've stopped editing my own mistakes at this point because it's just no point. Calypso, also encountered in the Odyssey, keeps Odysseus on her island, offering him immortality if he will remain as her consort. She lives in an otherworldly paradise, lush, fragrant, filled with singing birds, and this imagery is later echoed in the Land of Youth, Elfland, in Celtic mythology, and the other fairy realms of medieval romances. Like fairy queens, Calypso embodies the temptation to abandon mortal duties for eternal bliss, yet her love also threatens a hero's return to his own world, and that's another theme prominent in fairy ballads such as Thomas the Rhymer and Tam Lin. They're both autonomous female figures with sovereign power over their domains, and that inspired the portrayal of fairy queens as regal, as commanding and independent of patriarchal and mortal structures. In medieval and Renaissance literature, fairy queens similarly rule their lands with magical authority, unbound by human kingship. Edmund Spenser's Gloriana in The Fairy Queen combines this divine queenly presence with courtly virtue, while Shakespeare's Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream inherits the traits of enchantress, seductress and natural ruler from these ancient Mediterranean models. And there's lots of scholars, there's lots of things that I've read, including something by a lady called Catherine Briggs. She wrote an encyclopedia of fairies. And in this, she notes that Circe and Calypso are classical prototypes of the powerful fairy mistress, ruling in a place apart, sometimes benevolent, often perilous. Their blend of beauty, sorcery and sexual autonomy and dominion over liminal spaces became core motifs later on down the line. So they didn't inspire fairies directly as a species concept, but they definitely had a hand in shaping the archetype of the fairy queen. The immortal woman of enchantment, peril and allure, ruling beyond the human world's borders. And then we have the Romans, who believed in genii loci, which are spirits of place, and the Celtic people had similar entities with the Irish AOC, I think they're called ECs. I wrote the pronunciation down for this, but I've deleted it. Why would I do that? It's EC, I remember it's EC, or they're called people of the mounds. And they form the core of what we now think of as the fairy host. The Ísci are central to Irish mythology and folklore, and they're described as a supernatural race inhabiting the ancient hollow hills, barrows and burial mounds scattered across Ireland. And their name translates directly as, like I said, people of the mounds, referring to the hills seen as portals to the other world. They're not just spirits of the dead, but they're an enduring pre-Christian supernatural race, deeply connected to the landscape and sovereignty, and foundational to the later conception of fairies in British and broader Celtic traditions. And they are described in a very typical fairy fashion of what we would know. They have this otherworldly beauty and grace. Sometimes they have an ethereal glow. They wear fine clothing, often green, because it's this connection to the land, to Ireland, and they're often able to actually stay invisible unless they choose to be seen, which is a skill that I personally would love to have.
It's a good one.
It would be good. In the early Irish texts like the Book of Invasions, the divine tribe of the goddess Danu were defeated by the Milesians, who were the mortal ancestors of the Irish people. And they agreed to retreat to the earth and became the Ísci. And this conceptual migration underground gave rise to the belief that these beings continued to exist parallel to humanity, but just under the earth. They ruled this hidden otherworld within the land. And the second battle of Moytura describes them again as radiant, powerful, immortal, with kings and queens ruling from their mounds. And this is a direct precursor to medieval fairy queens. For example, Queen Med is associated with the Hill of Tara, a sovereignty goddess who blesses and legitimizes kingship. And I think I talked about this way back at the start of the podcast when I talked about the Morrigan. And this motif of the land's queen inspiring and controlling the mortal realm is, again, central to fairy queen archetypes. And the Ísci were perceived as both protectors and punishers of human behaviour. Offerings of milk, butter or bread were left at their mounds or at fairy forts to appease them. And the other world that they lived in, it wasn't hell, it wasn't heaven, it was this realm of eternal youth, beauty, feasting and music, which to me sounds like heaven, if I'm honest.
Pretty good.
Mm-hmm. It was just music and food, like there's nothing more you could need. And that echoed the idyllic lands of fairy tradition, such as Spenser's Fairyland or the elfin courts of Scott's ballads. And the adventure and voyage tales depict heroes visiting this other world. There's one called The Voyage of Bran, and that's a 7th or 8th century Irish text where Bran, who is the High King of Ireland, is invited by a beautiful woman to a land of joy. And I've got a few lines from that text that I really liked, which go like this. There is a distant isle, around which sea horses glisten. A fair course against the white swelling surge, 4 feet uphold each horse upon which the women ride. And that's really... that, I think, it gives the vibe of like an invitation, an allure. And that's, again, something that's just so prominent in so many different fairy ballads. And it's just this motif of a fairy queen drawing a mortal into their world. And then in Scottish and Gaelic folklore, the banshee also descends from the Ishi as a female spirit of fate or a death omen, retaining the sovereignty goddess aspect. And there's also, as I mentioned earlier, the ballad Thomas the Rhymer, in which Thomas, who is a poet, encounters the Queen of Elfland beneath the Eildon tree. And she takes him to the land of the fairies, where he spends several years, and during his time there he gains the gift of prophecy. But he's bound never to lie. After he returns to the mortal world, he becomes known for his truthful speech and his visions of the future, but he's forever marked by his time in the otherworldly realm. And again, I got another little quote from that one too. He says, I ride where none has rode, through the rivers deep and the mountains old, to the land where none grows old. The medieval Christianisation of Ireland and Britain reframed the Ishi as fallen angels or demoted gods, aligning them with the emerging concept of fairies being dangerous. And we'll go on to that a little bit more when I talk about medieval times and the Christianisation of things, where everything just becomes evil. Every episode I'm like, oh gosh. Yeah,
It's happened with sirens.
Yeah, that's all evil again. We get to the medieval times and magic's not allowed. But in contemporary folklore, the Ishi remain a living belief in rural Ireland. They're still there. There's road development, sometimes rerouted to avoid disturbing the little fairy forts, which is really, I think it's really cute.
Yeah.
We built our roads around them. That's very sweet. So, in summary, the Ishi didn't simply just inspire the idea of fairies as tiny winged sprites, but they provided the core mythic foundation for fairies as immortal, morally complex, with queens embodying natural sovereignty. And this archetype was forwarded into literature from Spenser's Gloriana to modern fairy queens, such as the ones we find in Sarah Jane Maas novels, which we will also come on to later. Their queens remain deeply tied to the land, to sovereignty and otherworldly beauty, and this is just a continuous tradition from ancient mounds to today's fantasy realms. And while the term fairy is European, we do have similar supernatural beings in many non-European ancient mythologies. In Japan, you have things like the yokai, which are nature-linked spirits. Some are mischievous, some are protective, and I think I spoke about that in a previous episode as well. In Middle Eastern mythology, you have the jinn, who are powerful, invisible beings with magical abilities and often interact with humans. In West Africa, the Aziza are small forest sprites who offer guidance. Hindu mythology includes asaras and yakshas, which are celestial and nature spirits tied to water and trees. Native American tribes tell of the little people, magical beings who live in nature and can be helpful or trickster-like. Southeast Asian folklore features spirits like Thailand's Phi and Nang Tani, linked to trees and to moonlight. And these beings, like fairies, reflect the global belief in magic, nature-dwelling entities. So there's a little introduction to the earliest known references of fairies and a little bit about what you can find outside of Europe, which are not specifically fairies, but it's the same concept. So there you go.
I'm curious, do you have a sense for why this type of story seems to be so common and widespread?
I think nature is a very powerful thing. And I think with a lot of mythology, with a lot of mythological themes and motifs and even like archetypes of specific people, I think a lot of it is to explain things. I think as humans, we have such an inherent need to explain everything that's happening to us, from, why is this bit of earth in a mound? Why is this tree growing? Why is it raining? Why is the moon bigger today than it was a week ago? And I think we've always done that as humans. We've always wanted to answer things. And I also just think when you take that need for answers and you combine it with the human imagination, the possibilities are truly endless. And you can't see them, so either they're invisible or they're just very small. So.
Well, I wrote down a couple phrases that felt like they could turn into songs. India, I'm curious if there's an idea in there that you would enjoy hearing a song about.
I think I would love to hear about the connection between the fairies and the earth, and maybe about the sort of parallel, them living under the mound.
Yeah.
In a sort of parallel. I really like the thought of, like, we've got our overworld and they're just down there. What does it look like? That and the nature and that sort of imagery, I think, is really strong. When I was writing, I was doing research. It was just like, if there was a fairy world underneath this mound of earth, what would it look like? What would, did they have big Tesco and and the cinema?
Right.
Above the ground, kingdoms spreading far. Below the ground, another one. Which parts of us are reflected below? How do they live without the sun? Beneath the hills we live. Beneath the hills.
Like a dream, looking in between, catching a glimmer, a whisper of what could be. Underneath the ground, within the
the hills we live. Beneath the hills. Beneath the hills.
And you can dig, but maybe don't dig too deep, lest you unearth the secrets that we keep. What you choose should know. If you break ground, you'll find the things you feared and that you paved your roads around. The curses in your hearts you don't bear to harrow were buried here beneath the sodden barrow. Don't dig too deep.
Beneath the hills we live. Beneath the hills we live. Beneath the hills.
That was so good. That That's great. Oh, I love that so much.
Rolled around.
That was great. The imagery in that was spot on. That's exactly what was in my head.
We didn't
Like,
answer the
so
question of whether there's a Tesco's, though.
You didn't.
That's to remain unknown, I think.
Oh, that's for the next song.
I think it's some things are better off being a mystery, isn't it? So let's have a chat about how fairies and interpretations of them have changed over time. It was the medieval period, as I said earlier, that really sort of cemented this fairy queen archetype, especially through literary transformations. In medieval Europe, fairies were portrayed as multifaceted beings who straddled the border between the natural and the supernatural, often reflecting broader religious, political, and social anxieties of the period. And their depictions were very much inspired by the Celtic, Germanic, and Christian traditions, evolving within a confluence of oral folklore, romance literature, and theological discourse. Fairies were not just whimsical figures of fancy in this time period, but they were powerful literary and cultural symbols embodying themes of temptation, moral ambiguity, and liminality. Medieval portrayals of fairies drew very heavily on pre-Christian mythologies, especially the Celtic ones that I mentioned earlier, whose otherworldly natures imbued them with these attributes of beauty, danger, and enchantment. In texts like the Breton Lays, particularly Marie de France's Landval, fairies are depicted as alluring again, but morally ambiguous, and they challenge feudal loyalty and Christian virtue. Lamval's fairy lover, who bestows riches and love upon him under the condition of secrecy, embodies the theme of conditional otherworldly generosity, which was very common in Celtic myth. So I'll do something for you very magical, but on a condition, which is very common. You see that a lot.
Yeah.
And these portrayals serve as literary warnings about the perils of pride, of disloyalty and disobedience, and that is very much a mirror of the feudal and religious ethos of the time. And if you look at fairies through a religious lens, you often see them cast as fallen angels or demons in this time period. And this was an attempt by ecclesiastical authorities to almost take all this popular folklore and absorb it into Christian cosmology and make them part of Christian faith, whether in a good way or a bad way. And this is something, like I said earlier, we've seen this a lot as we've gone through various ladies of law in the podcast. We get to this time period and it is very much the Christianization of the mythical figures that we're talking about. And that's no different for fairies. Fairies were sometimes interpreted as manifestations of the supernatural that either aligned with divine will or served as satanic distractions. And that was, satanic distraction. You can't be in the middle. You can't just be an all right guy. You're an evil demon or you're all right. And this is very much echoed the era's broader concern with sin and spiritual warfare. This theological framing is particularly visible in homiletic texts, and here you see belief in fairies being denounced as heretical or superstitious. And I took the liberty of trying to find some of these texts. It was very hard because lots of them are in Latin and I can't access them because I'm not important enough. I tried though. But fairy belief was very systematically demonized through these texts, and these were part of the church's broader strategy to suppress vernacular spiritual practices and enforce doctrinal orthodoxy. So there's a preacher called Vicent Ferrer, and he actively condemned fairy magic in public sermons, and again aligned this with heretical sorcery and sin. Like I said, the full text of this is not easy to find, so I don't have any quotes from that, but there are other theologians and clergy who classified popular tales of fairy encounters, especially those involving female spirits. What a surprise to nobody
Ain't that
at all.
Just the way.
Female spirits' nocturnal rides or secret pacts as diabolical deceptions orchestrated by Satan himself. Satan, like Elphaba, Satan sent out his fairies up from hell. He said, Fly, my pretties. Go and be heretic in medieval Europe.
Right.
And that's particularly evident in the 14th century Franciscan preaching texts, which directly attacked belief in fairies as sinful superstition. I do have a quote from one of those. There are women who claim to ride at night with the lady of the night and her followers. It's always women, isn't it? You know, there were male fairies too, I'll have you know.
God forbid we catch a vibe.
Yeah, I know. What's that about?
Also, the idea that all the temptress fairies are women, but they have to work for a man, the devil.
Yeah.
God forbid they be self-employed.
What about Mrs. Satan? Okay,
Right.
What about her? Penitential manuals such as penitential manuals such as the Penitential of Burchard of Worms, which is what a name.
Yeah.
What a name. The worms know what they're talking about. Instructed confession and penance for those who believed in phantasmata. What a great word that is, phantasmata. I feel like that's one we should bring back. I'm pretty distracted by that word.
Felix is writing it down right now.
Phantasmata.
If it shows up in our game within a few months, I would not be surprised.
Let me know. But yeah, so people who believed in phantasmata or claimed to consort with spirits like Holder and Perchta, who were figures tied to pre-Christian and fairy traditions. And these warnings served not only as a theological function, but also as a regulatory one, policing social norms around sexuality, gender, and authority. Clerical sources targeted women who claimed to ride with fairy queens like Diana, branding them witches or heretics. And by the 13th century, this demonological framing of fairies had become institutionalised within canon law, transforming fairies from folkloric intermediaries to agents of Satan. And these texts reshaped the cultural perception of fairies from enchanted beings to spiritual threats, and reinforced the church's campaign to replace indigenous beliefs with a tightly controlled Christian cosmology. And there's also a handbook of medieval culture, and this notes that fairies were also frequently portrayed as emissaries of the enchanted otherworld, and they acted as gatekeepers to realms of beauty and peril. And in these types of representations, the otherworld was not only a spatial domain, but it was also a psychological domain, reflecting the instability of the medieval psyche when confronted with the unknown. And the political dimension of fairy folklore is also pretty significant. During the high to late Middle Ages, fairies were integrated into chivalric romances, often as liminal figures who both aid and test knights. Their ambiguous morality, neither wholly good nor wholly evil, mirrored the growing complexity of feudal knighthood, where personal loyalty often conflicted with broader social duties. For instance, Chrétienne de Troyes' Yvain features the Lady of the Fountain, who was a fairy-like figure whose magical realm represents both temptation and reward, reflecting anxieties about courtly love and knightly virtue. And I talked a little bit about that and similar themes in the two-parter on Guinevere, so you can check that one out if you want to know more about chivalry and all that stuff. Further, fairy stories frequently featured female protagonists or antagonists, thereby engaging with contemporary gender ideologies. Fairy queens were often depicted as powerful, autonomous women who posed challenges to patriarchal order, as seen in Sir Orfeo, where the abduction of Herodes by the fairy king echoes the classical myth of Persephone, while also problematising ideas of male sovereignty and female agency. And this can be read through the lens of liminality, wherein fairies disrupt the binary and disrupt the moral structures and complicate gender hierarchies. In terms of social function, fairy lore provided a means of explaining inexplicable natural phenomena, misfortunes or mental illnesses, often referred to as being elf-struck or abducted. And these beliefs were particularly entrenched in rural communities where traditional oral tales preserved ancient cosmologies in the face of growing Christian hegemony. And there's a piece by Ronald Hutton called The Making of Early Modern British Fairy Tradition. These things never have sort of like snappy names. They're always like absolute word salad. But He said that these beliefs functioned as a form of vernacular metaphysics and helped people make sense of their world and its disruptions. And that's what I was saying earlier. I think that's why a lot of this happened, because people wanted to make sense of the world around them but didn't have the science and the technology that we had. But also, going back to the word elf-struck, that's a really good word, isn't it? I might use that going forward. If something's wrong, I'm just going to say, oh, sorry, I'm elf-struck today. I can't. Phantasmata and elf-struck. We've got a growing vocabulary today. The persistence of fairies in both elite and popular literature indicates their cultural utility across class lines, so everybody was interested in fairies, while aristocratic authors integrated them into romances to explore philosophical and theological ideas. Common people used fairy lore to express cultural memory, resistance and continuity. And this dual functions, both elite and vernacular, sort of exemplifies how adaptable the fairy motif is within the medieval culture. And the late medieval period saw an increasing systemization of fairy folklore, especially because you got the print press coming along, and print culture began to disseminate previously just oral traditions. So things were being written down, things were being shared on print. However, the tone shifted from ambiguous wonder to moralised caution, as we already know. And by the time of Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen in 1590, fairies had become symbolic vehicles for Protestant allegory, nationalistic ideas and moral virtue. And this transformation reflects the ideological transitions of the Reformation and the Renaissance, where the supernatural was co-opted into new religious and political narratives. And Edmund Spenser's Gloriana in The Fairy Queen is perhaps one of the most enduring fairy queens in literature. She's an allegory for Elizabeth I, but she's also an embodiment of the mythic fairy sovereign. She rules over knights and virtues and visions. And he writes, "A fairy knight beseeking her to serve, my liege I am," placing her at the axis of moral, spiritual and political power. And Shakespeare continued this thread with Queen Mab, who is a legendary figure from English folklore, but most famously popularised in Romeo and Juliet. And here she's depicted as a whimsical and eerie fairy. She's a queen of dreams. She's very ethereal, and in Mercutio's famous monologue, she's described as minuscule, ethereal, riding a chariot made from an empty hazelnut. I don't know why that's so funny to me.
So good.
Drawn by creatures no bigger than a gnat. So imagine, if you will, a hazelnut flying across the sky, drawn by 4 gnats. And she visits sleeping people, galloping across their noses to influence the content of their dreams according to their desires or professions. So a lover will dream of love. Soldiers will dream of war. Lawyers dream of fees. Although not derived directly from Celtic or ancient mythological traditions, she's become deeply associated with the broader idea of fairy monarchs and has evolved over time into a symbol of the Fae realm, illusion and the subconscious. And in later literature and fantasy, she often takes on a bit more of a regal, powerful persona, sometimes merging with or resembling Titania from Midsummer Night's Dream. And over time, the Enlightenment period significantly transformed the cultural meaning and representation of fairies in European thought, shifting them from enchanted and feared inhabitants of the supernatural realm into subjects of rational skepticism, nostalgic fantasy or moral allegory. And this transformation was part of the broader Enlightenment agenda that prioritised empirical science, reason and secularism. And it altered how fairies were conceptualised across intellectual, literary and folkloric contexts. And I feel like whenever I get to the Enlightenment period, it just sounds a bit boring. It sounds like all the fun and the whimsy, it was just sucked right out of the world. And we all put on our scientific heads and we didn't let ourselves have fun and think about running around the forest with little winged people. But maybe that's just me, but I feel like it's just, so we get to that point in time and everyone's just like, I don't want to have fun anymore, I just want to talk about science. Just feels like a very rigid time period in my head. But I am on to the Enlightenment now, so I don't know if you guys want to do anything based on everything I just said before I continue.
The idea of blaming everything that goes wrong on being elf-struck was one idea I had. Woke up on the wrong side of bed today. Then I rolled to the floor. Can't get those thoughts running around my head. Banged my head on the door.
Ow.
Burnt my eggs, burnt my coffee. Dang. I'm dang out of luck.
Where's my luck?
There's only one thing I can blame this on. I've been elf-struck. Elf-struck.
My mind's not my own. Couldn't find my own way home. All my friends say I've been acting strange.
Hey, you've been acting strange.
I hear their concerns. I can't even remember my own name. Oh, it feels like I am just stuck.
Been wandering around these parts with no aim in sight. It's been so long since I've known day from night. I go deeper and deeper. Can't tell bad from good. No, it seems I've had my faculties robbed by these words. Could I be
You got me good.
What the fuck? I've been sorry. I've been wanting to say that the whole time. Like, I don't know what the ratings are.
I don't care. Listen, we talk about everything on the podcast. If you want to drop an F-bomb,
We'll
drop
mute
an
it with an
F-bomb.
F minor chord on ours. Yeah, thanks.
Wow, that was great.
So silly.
That really tickled me, that one. Oh, goodness gracious. I feel like I've been elf-struck. Oh, great. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the Enlightenment's emphasis on rational inquiry and skepticism led many scholars and clerics to dismiss belief in fairies as irrational remnants of an unenlightened, superstitious past. Fairy lore was increasingly described as not a reflection of genuine spiritual or supernatural experience, but as a bit of a cultural detritus. They were essentially fossils of pre-modern thinking that had no place in this shiny age of reason. And this is why I say that it's boring in that time period. Boring. But scientific naturalism and Protestant rationality helped accelerate this shift by putting fairies in the same category as ghosts, witches, and demons. So they're all irrational and unprovable phenomena. Boring. But this meant that discourse came to regard fairies as part of a peasant worldview that needed reform or elimination. And to that, I say peasants were having more fun. in some ways. But worry not, because this didn't mean that fairies were just erased from culture. Instead, they were taken, they were repackaged, and they were reimagined. And Enlightenment writers and moralists recontextualized fairy tales for teaching purposes, particularly literature intended for children. And we heard this on the episode that I just did about Cinderella. So authors like Charles Perrault and the Brothers Grimm restructured fairy tales to reflect bourgeois morality, gender norms, and social discipline. And the supernatural elements, they weren't eliminated, but they were rendered as more symbolic. They were just there to reinforce Enlightenment values under a fantastical veneer. In this literary context, fairies were no longer threatening citizens from the other world, but they were just allegorical devices used to instruct children in piety, obedience, and reason. And at the same time, the Enlightenment catalysed the development of folklore as an academic and nationalist pursuit. Scholars like Johann Herder, and later the Grimms collected folk narratives, including those with fairies, not to validate their truth, but to preserve what they saw as the imaginative past. And this folkloristic impulse was shaped by Enlightenment taxonomies and historicism, which recast fairy stories as expressions of a now vanished pre-scientific worldview. As Florence Behet notes in her paper called Faeries and Folklore, the Folklore Society of the 19th century later adopted this model, viewing fairies as ossified historical beliefs. That's her exact words. They're no longer active in the world, but deserving of an anthropological preservation. The fairy thus became an object of intellectual nostalgia, a lost link to a time when mystery and imagination structured rural life. And despite the Enlightenment's commitment to disenchantment, its legacy was a bit of a paradox, really, because the demystification of fairies created space for their re-enchantment in literature and art. Romantic poets like William Blake and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, reacting against Enlightenment rationalism, invoked fairies as symbols of lost magic, lost creativity, and the sublime. And it's here, in this Romantic period, just before the Victorians, that Queen Mab comes up again. Percy Bysshe Shelley's poem Queen Mab, written in 1813, when he was still quite young, is a philosophical and visionary work that uses the figure of Queen Mab, a cosmic fairy spirit, as a vehicle to explore profound themes of social justice, human suffering, and the hope for a better future. Unlike the mischievous and whimsical Queen Mab in her hazelnut of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Shelley's Queen Mab is powerful. She's ethereal. She's a guide who takes the narrator on a sweeping journey through visions of the past, the present, and the potential future. Throughout these visions, she reveals the deep injustices and corruption entrenched in human society. Things like tyranny, religious dogma, and economic exploitation are exposed as the root cause of much of human misery. It's still the same today, isn't it? Still the same. Queen Mab shows that through reason, science, and enlightenment, humans can transcend these limitations and build a society based on justice, equality, and freedom. The poem reflects Shelley's early embrace of radical romantic ideals, combining visionary imagination with political and social critique. So in this way, Queen Mab serves both as a visionary critique of Shelley's contemporary world and a call for revolution towards a more enlightened and compassionate future. This wasn't a turn to literal belief of fairies, but a re-evaluation of the irrational as aesthetically and emotionally meaningful. In this form, fairies survived into modernity, not as real entities, but as imaginative critiques of Enlightenment values themselves. So the Enlightenment and Romantic periods didn't so much extinguish fairy belief, just sort of dislocated it, removed it from the domain of religion and cosmology, and reinserted it into literature, moral lesson teaching, and nationalism. And then we come on to the Victorian period. And it's here where fairies underwent a rich and contradictory cultural transformation. No longer primarily figures of folkloric dread or spiritual allegory, they became vessels for complex and often conflicting ideals about childhood, femininity, nature, and imagination. And this transformation was deeply tied to the Victorian era's preoccupation with industrialisation, empire, gender norms, and shifting attitudes towards childhood and morality. Rather than being erased by Enlightenment rationalism, fairies were again repurposed. They were domesticated in some contexts and rendered dangerously subversive in others. But it was really children's literature at the time where fairies gained new prominence. They became ideal vehicles for both fantasy and instruction, and this builds on what I was saying before. Childhood's a time of imagination and moral plasticity. Those little children brains are just ready to be moulded and changed, and fairy tales emerged as a space where children could be both entertained and ethically formed. And a great example of this comes from the work of Christina Rossetti, whose Goblin Market of 1862 presents a fairy do you know this one?
No, I just love the phrase goblin market.
So do I. It presents a fairy-inflicted allegory of temptation, sisterhood, and sacrifice. Now, I know I said Goblin Market, right? Which, firstly, how cute is the image of that? It's not a cute story, though. It's really not. But it's just cute, isn't it? Like, in my head, I picture like a little street market, like little street food vendors, like a food truck. Everything's a goblin.
Like a little guy selling the lumpiest squash.
Yeah, like ugly vegetables. And
somebody's knit you a scarf, but it has somehow 2 neck holes, and it's unexplainable. I don't know.
It's for no reason. I love it. I love it. But yeah, that's what I think. Anyway, back to the point. Christina Rossetti does not use the word fairies directly, but goblins in her tale function as a supernatural tempter, a disruptive force who threatens the spiritual and physical integrity of young women. And let me tell you, this poem is wild. Oh, it's wild. I'll read you a short synopsis. The poem tells the story of 2 sisters, Laura and Lizzie, who live near a mysterious glen, where goblin merchants sell magical fruit. And yeah.
I'm reacting with delight.
Yeah. Goblins tempt women with their luscious produce. It's like the juiciest fruit you've ever seen. But they're dangerous. The fruit is dangerous to consume, and everybody sort of knows that low key. They're like, I don't want to, like, goblin fruit. Looks good, but I'm not sure. But Laura, she is very much drawn in by the goblin's call. She can't resist this fruit. It's the best looking piece of fruit she's ever seen. And so she gives a lock of her hair in exchange for the fruit. And she's so excited, she just yams it in. She's so, like, she can't hold herself back. Now, she becomes addicted to this fruit. It's her own personal brand of heroin, for those of you out there that are Twilight fans. And she's desperate to just get back to this market. She's like, I've got to get back there. I'll shave off my whole head. I'll give them every piece of hair on my body for more of this fruit. But when she goes back, the market's not there anymore. The goblins don't appear to her anymore. And she is, like, properly addicted at this point. She begins to waste away. She grows weak and lifeless. And Lizzie, seeing her sister's decline, bravely goes to the goblins to try and save her. And the goblins try to force her to eat some of the fruit too, but she resists and endures abuse from them. Eventually, she returns to Laura, beaten up and completely covered in the juices from all of this fruit. And she urges her sister to kiss the fruit juice off of her face to cure her, which Laura does. And the act purges the poison from her body, and she suffers through a pretty painful recovery, but ultimately she is healed. In the end, the sisters grow older, and the poem closes with a moral lesson about the strength of sisterly love and the dangers of succumbing to temptation.
Jesus. I knew that was coming.
So, like I said, it's wild. Goblins with, like, special addictive fruit. And the classic Victorian wellness plan to starve, hallucinate, and die pretty and skinny. It's all a bit weird. But to bring it back to the actual point, Rossetti, like other Victorian women writers, used fairy tropes to critique patriarchal expectations and to explore alternate models of female solidarity and moral agency. And parallel to this type of literary use, fairies were also visual and popular cultural icons. They frequently appeared in pantomimes, in illustrations and decorative arts. Artists like Richard Dadd and John Anster Fitzgerald filled canvases with intricate depictions of fairy revels, woodland courts and eerie nocturnal scenes. And these representations often evoked both enchantment and unease. In them, fairies became proxies for Victorian ambivalence about nature and the unconscious, a response to the rapid mechanisation of society. So at the minute, you've got Industrial Revolution happening, and the disenchantment of the natural world. The Victorian fairy aesthetic fused natural history with fantasy, imagining fairies as insect-like, more sort of botanical or zoologically plausible beings that still carried the emotional charge of the mystical. Spiritualism offered yet another reinvention of the fairy. In a century increasingly driven by scientific discovery and Darwinian thought, many Victorians turned to spiritualist practices as a way to reconcile belief in the unseen with the rational language of proof and investigation. Figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle believed in fairies not as metaphors but as real elemental beings supported by what they thought was photographic evidence. And probably the most well-known example of this is the Cottingley Faeries hoax. And this was crazy, so I thought I'd tell you about that too.
I love the Cottingley Faeries so much.
It's so funny, isn't it? How did anyone believe that? How did anyone believe that? I don't know.
Girls can do anything they put their minds to.
Quite literally, girls can do anything. If
Girls
you
can
learn
scam
anything.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle if they want.
Literally. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle goes to bat for these girls. He's writing about it. He's telling the world about it. And all along they knew it wasn't real, but they just said, pop off, King. Tell our story. So for those that don't know, basically the Cottingley Faeries hoax began in 1917 in the village of Cottingley near Bradford in England. And two cousins, Elsie Wright, who was 16 at the time, and Frances Griffiths, who was 9, they claimed to have photographed real fairies. The first photograph, taken by Elsie using her father's camera, showed Frances sitting near a small stream with what appeared to be winged fairies dancing in front of her. And there's a second photo taken a few months later, which showed Elsie and a gnome. And listen, these images, they're pretty obviously fake. Like, you can Google this. I will put the links in the show notes. You can Google this. If you look at this and you think it's real, I don't know what to tell you. But I guess we are looking at it through a... Are you Googling it?
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull it up.
I'm so curious.
I'll let you Google it and you can tell me what you...
Come on. Sorry.
People ate that up. People thought that was real. Yeah.
It's actually pretty similar to stuff I used to do as a kid, where I would like wear wings and try to like stand on a very small rock and then jump off it and try to time the photo so that it looked like I was flying.
She was a fairy. But yeah, so we're looking at it through a 2025 lens, you know, and you sort of think, how the heck did anyone believe this? But we are living in an age of excellent Photoshop and AI slowly destroying all of our brain cells, but also being able to turn your dog into a human. So it's very easy for us to be like, no, this is fake. But at the time, they really captured public imagination. And the girls initially took the photos just to amuse themselves and their families, and they cut out illustrations of fairies from a popular children's book and propped them up with hat pins to take the pictures. But when Frances's mother showed the pictures at a meeting of the Theosophical Society, which had an interest in the supernatural and mystical phenomena, they caught the attention of someone called Edward Gardiner, and he was a leading theosophist. Mama knew what she was doing when she took those pictures to that meeting. But also, pop off for going to the Theosophical Society meeting. Like, we love that. We love to see it from Mama in 1917. Mm-hmm. But Gardiner had prints of these pictures made, and he sent them to Harold Snelling, who was a photography expert. Now, he dead ass looked at these photos, and he said, that is genuine. There's no sign of fake, of manipulation in these photos. That is a real... They took that, that's real. He didn't make any claims about the fairies being real, but he said the picture was real, was legit. But the story gained real traction when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, yes, him, the creator of Sherlock Holmes and committed spiritualist, became involved in the story. Conan Doyle was commissioned by the Strand magazine to write an article about fairies, and the Cottingley photographs, well, they were just the ideal thing to put into this to evidence his argument that spiritual beings could be real. He corresponded with the girls and their families. At this point, you sort of think, I would probably tell the truth, but they did not. They did not. And he became convinced that these photos were real. He genuinely, with his whole full chest, thought that these were real fairies. And in 1920, The Strand published his article, and it caused a sensation. A second article followed in 1921 with even more photographs and further endorsement of the fairies' existence. You gotta laugh. Despite the growing skepticism from photographers, from scientists, and the public, the girls stuck to their story for decades. And like I said, Arthur Conan Doyle, he was their ride or die with this. He said, I believe you, I will stick by you.
Ally.
I feel like there's a song right here. Like there's a song right there.
I'll stop after the story. You can please do your thing on this. I would love to hear it. And it wasn't until the 1980s, more than 60 years after the first photos were taken, that Elsie and Francis finally said, do you know what? Those photos were not real. They said, sorry guys, we staged the photographs using drawings they copied from a 1915 children's book called Princess Mary's Gift Book. Now, if this was a book in publication, did nobody who owned that book think, God Christ, they got those really accurate in that book? It's like, they got them really good. But they'd cut out the illustrations, they'd added their own wings, and they'd used hat pins to keep them upright in the grass. It's really interesting because even after admitting that the first 4 photographs were faked, Francis still maintained that the 5th and final photo taken in 1920 was real and did show actual fairies. Elsie said, stop lying, they're all fake. She was done with it at this point. They're like in their 70s, let's not. The girls said that they had been too embarrassed to come clean earlier, especially given the attention and credibility lent by figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And what began as just a childish prank spiralled into a national myth, supported by a longing for wonder in a post-war Britain that had just emerged from the trauma of World War I. And the Cottingley Fairies remain one of the most famous photographic hoaxes of the 20th century. It's a story that exposes both the power of belief and the ease with which people, even very intelligent people, can be deceived when they want to believe in magic. I just think there's something so funny about this story. Like, these girls were prepared to take this to their actual graves, but they didn't. So you guys, if you want to do something with that, I personally would love to hear it. Yeah. I really, really would.
If there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that you must trust your eyes. Your other senses, they may tell you lies, but if you've got a photograph of some unusual scene, you can be certain that what you're seeing, it's elementary. It's a real fairy. It's elementary. It's a real fairy. It's elementary. It's a real fairy. It's elementary. It's a real fairy.
You see those hairpins over there? I don't think we should just use them for hair. You know that book we get read every night. There's a thing we could steal from it, or maybe not steal, but we could add our wings and make it right.
And I've got my father's camera. We've got the afternoon. We could entertain ourselves. We could get started soon. There's no way this could escalate or turn into something big.
No way.
Take the hat pins from the wig.
It's elementary.
It's a real fairy. It's elementary. It's a real fairy. It's elementary. It's a real fairy. Elementary.
It's a real fairy. Okay. Cousin dear, pose with the light, hitting you ear to ear. And we can prop the fairies up real nice. What a beautiful sight.
It's a really fun idea, but no one will believe it.
No need.
There's no need to share. No one will need to see it.
I'll just show.
We'll just have these copies, and we'll give them to our mom. And she won't take them to a really fancy social salon. Elementary. It's a
elementary. It's a real fairy. I was gonna do like another verse like, Elsie, it's been years. We're old now. What's happened to us?
The weight of lies pushes down on us.
You could have gone on forever, and I would have just let you
all the way to the 80s.
You'd be like, God, I love those new Star Wars films. Also, I'm consumed with guilt.
Do you want to go see Die Hard after we come clean about this?
Yeah, of course. Oh my God, the Berlin Wall came down and so did our facade.
One of my favorite things about the Cottingley Fairies too is that they made this like very, very like Secret Garden Little Princess coded movie about them called Fairy Tale. And it's about how, because Houdini and Conan Doyle were like really good friends, but Houdini was always a skeptic, and they were like, we're going to agree to disagree on this. And it sort of has them and then the girls. But the one thing is that at the end of the movie, it reveals that the fairies were real the whole time.
Wow.
Which is a little bit of a different take.
Someone's like, I refuse to be told. It's a lie.
Oh, that was great. At the same time as all of this madness was going on, fairy tales were becoming a domain where anxieties about female agency, consumption, and bodily transformation were projected. Victorian literature frequently associated fairy-like characters with the changing, unstable body, figures both alluring, again, and dangerous. And these themes are particularly evident in discussions of appetite and beauty. Not to take it back to the goblin market for a sec, but the consumption of magical fruit by Laura is simultaneously erotic, spiritual, and cautionary, a perfectly fitting metaphor for desire in a society obsessed with feminine purity and bodily control. Victorian fairy tales offered a veiled critique of anorexic ideals and the commodification of femininity, portraying female bodies as contested terrains of virtue, desire, and resistance. So there we go. Victorian fairies were not whimsical figures for children. They were versatile symbols reflecting the era's deepest contradictions. They signified purity and eroticism, childhood and subversion, nature and empire, fantasy and spiritual longing. So in this way, the Victorian period didn't so much as inherit the fairy tale as reinvent it, turning it into a screen upon which the social, moral, and psychological crises of the century could be projected and partially resolved. And little children could fool the whole world. And there you go. That is the Victorian fairy. If you guys want to do something else between the two, please feel free. Go for it.
If you cast your eyes back to the past, will you find ideas that last? If you find those that are strong, what do you do when science proves them wrong? Is your mirror clear, or is it telling you lies? When you look into the past and the present, how do you tell truth from lies?
You can only see if you're not looking with your eyes. And sure, you can think with your brain, not with your mind. What we've left in the dusty past could stay there if we like. But everything on those pages, they're not dead, they are alive. When you're looking in the mirror, it does become so clearer. When you're looking in the mirror, does your view
pounds or grams. Oh, where's the room for magic? And people turning into rams.
Yeah, they're always doing that.
Is there room for something to move between when you always need your hypothesis to be clean? In the mirror, in the looking glass, in the mirror, losing the past.
Where's your whimsy? Where's your fun? You're not with anyone who wants to invite you to a party. You're too dull. And that's just bull. Are we not having any fun anymore? Like, what does this all mean? I see beauty and I don't need to describe it.
In the mirror,
In the mirror, in the mirror, in the mirror.
in the looking glass.
Oh, brilliant.
I'm losing steam. Weird spoken British.
Right, let's move on to modern times, and I'm going to be straight up with you here. We can't talk about fairies in the modern world without talking about the absolute surge in books that pertain to fairies in an adult way. In an adult way.
Why,
With
what
the
do you
ri-
mean, India?
Well, with the rise of book talk has come the rise in what has been very cutely dubbed fairy smut. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I've dabbled. I have absolutely dabbled in some fairy smut.
Reading or writing?
Just reading. I only ever wrote fan fiction about Carol and Daryl from The Walking Dead. I wrote that.
Wonderful.
One of the best TV couples of all time.
I was about 12. You know what? Actually, not that long ago, I got an email to say that somebody had liked my fanfic that I wrote like 18 years ago. And I thought, oh my God, maybe I should pick this up again. I've not written fairy smut though.
Okay, we're going to pitch some ideas then. This can be a working session.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Oh, but yeah, I've absolutely dabbled in some fairy smut. Quite frankly, it wasn't for me. But it is insanely popular. And you know what? Fairies being horny is not a new thing, guys, as we know. It's not new. So it's really not that surprising that in a much more liberal world, when it comes to being open about sex and sexuality, that fairies have crossed over into the realm of smutty books. And fairy smut books or erotic fairy romance novels are a massive subgenre within contemporary fantasy and romance literature. Like I said, we can't really talk about fairies and not talk about it, all jokes aside. Often termed fairy erotica or dark fae romance, they blend traditional fairy folklore with explicit sexual content, political intrigue, and high fantasy world building, creating narratives that reimagine fairies as sensual, morally ambiguous, and deeply intertwined with human desire and power structures. And the modern fairy smut genre really crystallised in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, alongside broader developments in fantasy romance and paranormal erotica. It draws on urban fantasy's integration of supernatural beings into contemporary settings, as well as high fantasy's elaborate world building. Authors often reframe fairy courts as sites of intense sensual politics, combining the dangerous allure of older fairy myths with erotic power play and romance tropes like enemies to lovers and fated mates and bondage dynamics. And probably the most popular and influential author in this whole scene is Sarah J. Maas, who went a significant way in popularising fairy smut through her Court of Thorns and Roses series. And I have in fact read this series. Have any of you guys read ACOTAR?
No, but I have a friend. Well, I had a friend from college that was really her thing. But I went to a Christian school. I think that was maybe an outlet for some folks.
Yeah. You gotta get it where you can get it.
I suppose. Whoa.
But I have in fact read this book series, and the first one is like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then the second book, which is called A Court of Mist and Fury, I think. I did a review for this book on Fable. I like to write book reviews, right? But I write them, they're really bad. I'm going to read you my review for this book. I just didn't get it. I was like, okay, my review is, if you took the word mate out of this book, how many words would be left? That is my entire, because it is all about fairies and fairy mates. But this second book introduced really explicit erotic scenes that redefined the tone of the series, and from there it went off. Sarah J. Maas's depiction of the Night Court and its High Lord Rhysand blends fairy serenity with romantic dominance and sexual liberation. And Sarah J. Maas herself wrote that there are different kinds of darkness. There is the darkness that frightens, the darkness that soothes, the darkness that is restful. There is the darkness of lovers and the darkness of assassins. It becomes what the bearer wishes it to be. It is not wholly bad or good. And I thought it was interesting that she said that, because if you go right back to the start of this episode, I said about fairies not being wholly bad or wholly good. And I think throughout time, they have straddled this line of being, they can be a blessing or a curse, they can be evil, they can also give a lot, they can also gift, they can also take you to a wonderful, beautiful, incredible place. So although I can't tell you that I ate up the ACOTAR series, because that would be a lie, in fact I think I actually skipped through a lot of the smut scenes. In the first book, they all have masks on. It's like a masquerade. They've all got like it's like a curse, and they all have masks on. And I couldn't get past that in my head. Like to quote Justin Bieber, like, it was not clocking to me. I didn't understand why they had these on their face. And then there were lots of horny descriptions of wings and things, which I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm not straight. Maybe. It might be that, you know.
That might be it, man.
I was actually going to ask about this, because when I think of like traditional fairy lore and the way that you were describing it, especially, there's a lot of gender subversion with
absolutely.
like feminine power and like androgyny and gender fluidity. And so it's interesting. And I haven't read this series. I have consumed, I checked the name of this YouTuber, Carrie Can Read, who's a video essayist who summarizes and reviews a lot of trendy books, who did a very funny, very thorough recap of this series. So I kind of know basic plot points through there. Yeah. But it feels like in many ways, some of the romance and romantasy novels that have become really popular, are they incorporating that sort of queerness and subversion, or are they kind of pulling away from it? Because it feels like...
It doesn't feel like they're incorporating it. It doesn't to me.
That feels like kind of the main draw in certain ways, or it should be a big draw.
I think so, absolutely. I think, you know, it's very easy, I think, because I'm sure one of the characters Sarah J. Maas has said is bisexual, so is part of the queer community. But I don't know if that's sort of like a retrospective edition. It's not really something that I was aware of when I was reading it. And like you say, the fairies are very androgynous. They're very much, there is subversion. There is a lot of sexual feminine power, which is probably why part of the reason why they were demonized by Christianity, because Christianity in medieval Christianity did not like that. You know, women with power, especially women with sexual power, that was not happening. That was not allowed. But I think from what I've read anyway, and I might be wrong, so if anyone listening does know of any really good queer representation in this genre, that would be really interesting for me to know, because I would be more open to reading it. Like I said, maybe it's just because muscled men with wings don't really do anything for me. But having said that, I can see why these books are so popular to the target audience, because I don't want this to come across as me shading these books, because I think anything that gets people reading is good. And these books are an absolutely great gateway into other fantasy book series, because I feel like fantasy as a genre can be really intimidating. You've got, big chunky tomes by like Brandon Sanderson, and to someone who's never read a fantasy book, that can feel really daunting when you've got all of this world building, all of these characters, all of these point of views. So books like the ACOTAR series, a really easy introduction to the genre, especially for women, because this is a genre that has been maybe a bit gatekept by men, maybe a little bit by men for men. And I think, so if you're into your fairy smut, then that's still, you're still reading. Power to you. But I mean, if that's something that you guys might be interested in listening, give it a whirl, because just because I didn't vibe with it doesn't mean that it's not good and doesn't mean that it's not for you. But there are other examples, like the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy and the Fae Chronicles by Amelia Hutchins. I've not read these ones, but apparently they lean a lot more into sort of the erotic fantasy and BDSM with fairies, possessive fae lords and heroine empowerment arcs, and they use tropes of fairy mating bonds, magical sexual enhancement, and taboo crossing encounters to explore desire within frameworks of fantasy sovereignty and consent negotiation. And it's really interesting. You just mentioned about subversion, because you can argue that texts like this, with that element of sexual power and dynamics, they can either reinforce or subvert patriarchal structures depending on how it's framed, and who's got the agency in the situation. So it's really interesting that it can do that. I would imagine a lot of it is not subverting it as much as I would probably like to see, but I can't 100% say that because I've not read it. But to also look at it academically, fairy smut books are actually a really rich field for studying sort of the intersection of folklore, erotic fiction, and feminist or post-feminist discourse, because they do reflect this modern reclamation of the fairies' perilous allure, but this time reimagined for a readership who want to have both this escapist fantasy and transgressive erotic exploration. And they continue the long-standing mythic theme of fairies as liminal figures who can destabilise human boundaries between moral categories, social hierarchies, and acceptable sexual behaviour. And the rise of BookTok has popularised fairy smut even more, driving sales and shaping reading cultures. Fans, if you go on BookTok, you can see fans, they often highlight that the fact that these fairies are morally ambiguous and intense is what they want. That's what they like. It's this sort of like intoxicating blend of high fantasy and explicit romance. We've seen the cosplay, we've seen the TikToks. It's a massive market, and TikTok itself is such a big vessel for advertising that. So yeah, fairy smut books are the contemporary heirs of a lineage stretching from medieval fairy queens seducing mortal knights to Renaissance allegories of sensual enhancement, reworked within the frameworks of modern fantasy romance, erotic literature, and digital fandom. They transform the fairy tradition into a genre that explores desire, power, and transgression at the borderlands of myth and sexuality.
It's interesting that in a lot of these old fairy ballads, it's a male hero who's like swept into a fairy land and becomes a consort of a fairy queen, or is the sort of object of fascination of a queen. And, you know, ACOTAR's one of many, many books, but that's the sort of female protagonist swept into a fae court and becomes the object of fascination to like a fae lord, which feels like a reversal. In some ways, I'm like, where else do you see that? Like Labyrinth, kind of, maybe? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just like thinking about like the different dynamics there. And I think like we've seen with fairies, you can apply subversiveness to it. You can apply your own moral values or judgments to it. And they kind of have this, like the little zoetrope bird in a cage effect, where it's kind of whatever you want it to be at that moment.
Yeah, I think fantasy in general, not just sort of like this erotic, this fae smut stuff, I feel like it's had a massive increase in subverting the genre, and a lot of female protagonists. You know, I've read a lot of books recently and they're all female protagonists, you know, like the Poppy War series, which is a really...
Love the Poppy War.
Yeah. you know, there's so many where you've got this strong female main character, and I think that's great, because I think, like I said earlier, I think girls have sometimes been kept out of fantasy, and it does, I think traditionally it's been a very boy genre. And then you add on the sexual part of it, and that appeals to an even wider market by subverting that genre, and it is really interesting that that's happened. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion when it comes to literature and fantasy, and I think fairies are probably the main mythical or folkloric creature that does this across literature. It's very, very interesting to see. Maybe I should read some fairy smut for research purposes. But outside of the world of fairy smut, film and TV frequently adapt fairies into more sanitised forms for children. Fairies in modern TV and film continue to thrive, not as quaint winged sprites for children, but as flexible symbols for magic, danger, seduction, and the unknown. They've evolved into something stranger, darker, more subversive, depending on the genre. So you've got fantasy dramas like Carnival Row, where fairies are reimagined as a persecuted immigrant underclass, complete with wings, class conflict, and noir intrigue. It's a bit more of a gritty steampunk allegory than an enchanted, whimsical forest. You've got shows like True Blood that offered a more lethal, sexy version of fairies as radiant beings from another dimension who, despite their glittery appearance, were hunted and feared for their addictive blood. Then you've got shows like Shadowhunters and The Witcher, which include fae creatures not as fluttery sidekicks, but as politically complex and often morally ambiguous players in a dark fantasy world. In Maleficent, Disney took the evil fairy archetype and recentered it with empathy and trauma, giving the fairy queen a tragic backstory and rebranding her not as a villain but as a misunderstood guardian. Even Tinkerbell, the once passive sidekick of Peter Pan, has got her own narrative spin-off in films. I think she's got loads of films. She's got her own TV series, films. She's often portrayed as inventive, brave, and a curious heroine, though still softened for a younger audience. But again, it's teaching mostly young girls about these themes of being strong, independent, brave, curious, and teaching those values. Meanwhile, in anime and animation, fairy motifs often appear with more surreal resonance. Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away, while not about fairies per se, has a lot of fae energy. Got spirits and shapeshifters and forest deities and uncanny beings drawn from Japanese folklore, but echoing this global fairy trope. In darker series like American Horror Story, fairy-like creatures appear in distorted or metaphorical forms, psychic women, interdimensional beings, or tragic visionaries that carry the echoes of old fairy legends through a modern psychological lens. Fairies also surface in children's media, of course, but even there, the tone is often sly or self-aware. Shows like Adventure Time or Over the Garden Wall feature fae-like entities that are unsettling and whimsical in equal measure. Across genres, the modern fairy isn't a one-note character, but more of a mood. You got ancient, elusive, beautiful, dangerous, exploited, misunderstood characters, whether cast as a metaphor for the marginalised or as a force of nature just outside human control. The fairy persists in today's screen stories not as a static archetype, but as a constantly shifting mirror for our fascination with the other world. And off the page and off the screen, fairies are still around today as symbols of re-enchantment in an often disenchanted modernity. Neo-pagan and druidic communities still honour them as spirits of place. Like I said earlier, the roads being rerouted around fairy mounds in Ireland. I also found there's actually an annual Fairy Worlds festival in Oregon.
That's so close.
Really?
It celebrates their enduring presence. Now, I went on the subreddit. I read that it's a mix between a Renaissance fair and a rave, which is a vibe of some sort. And then I read that it was the most someone wrote that it's the most kid-friendly festival they've ever been to, but then someone else wrote that there's more drugs than any festival they've ever been to. Huh. So I'm like, which one is it? It could be anything. But it happens every year. People go. And I think that is perhaps all I have to say on the matter of fairies today. And I'm going to end with a W.B. Yeats quote, who believed in fairies his entire life. And in his The Stolen Child, he writes, "Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy, hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand." And if I'll hand it over to you guys if you wanted to do a song about the modern fairy.
There goes the human child to the waters wet and wild, with the fairy hand in hand. The world's more full of weeping than you'll understand, hand in hand. The body's buried below the barrow. I know I'll follow them, just take my hand and we'll go. I want a place that is free of black and white, somewhere where it's always twilight or dawn instead of day or night. We'll go. Oh, we'll go. You say I'm stolen, I was a stolen child, but you don't know the things I stole and I brought back. The wisdom gleaned, the stories on my tongue. I tell the truth when I say I wouldn't give them back. And I'll go. When I go.
Your words will meld with mine. Our stories will merge. Our stories will echo throughout time. Always something new to emerge. I'll make this promise to thee. Our story will be what you need it to be. I'll make this promise to thee. Our story will be what you need it to be.
When we go. And we'll go.
What you needed to.
Wanted a place where my tears could water the
What you needed
green,
to.
instead of seeping into cobblestones unseen. The world is full of sorrow, you say, as if you know. Then why would you steal from me the things my tears could water and grow as we go? Oh, as we go.
Your story will grow.
That was really, really good. That's powerful. I like that. Wow. Thank you guys so much. That was so good. That's all I have to say.
I learned so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brain grown.
Good.
Yeah.
That's what we do. That's what we
Yeah.
try to do.
It's really lovely to hear, and I think I'm probably having a similar experience to what Lauren had in the Siren episode, where there are certain themes that you've pulled out through the ages that really resonate with themes that have been burbling around in the conception of the character, themes that have been at times at the surface, at times informing the character indirectly. The way that fairies interface with nature and the way that humans have this instinctive desire to try to grab them and make sense of them and make them into one thing, because that is how they need to make sense of the world.
Yeah.
Is something that is so central to, I think, the way we imagine fairies, or the way that my character Aubrey contextualizes her understanding of fairies, and is something that has guided her throughout the entire story.
No, I'm glad. I'm glad I could help to grow your brains and hopefully, give you some context for what you've already done and some context to influence what might come next in your amazing podcast.
I did have a question for you, India, and I don't know if this is one you'll have a good answer to, but I'm curious because you mentioned Ireland building their roads around fairy forts, and I know in Iceland there's still a tradition of bringing meals to and I'm curious if you have a hypothesis on why those stories seem to be a bit more enduring in those places than they have, say, in the UK or the US.
I wonder if it's to do with the rurality of it, because like I said, I think it was in the bit about the medieval period, it's in more rural areas, oral tradition tends to survive a bit more, and that's the same for languages, for instance, like Celtic and other Welsh languages seem to survive more in these little pockets of rural areas, and a lot of that is just because if you're going back to that time period, it's not as touched and influenced by what's going on in the more built up areas. And I wonder if that has something to do with it, because these folk tales all started as oral tales, and they're told without print and without one rigid story. And I wonder if perhaps when people live in more rural areas, they do feel a little bit more connected to the land and more connected to the nature that's around them. And maybe that has some influence to it as well. If you feel really connected to where you are, and fairies are part of that and connected to the land that you live in, that may also contribute to it. But it's a really interesting question.
And perhaps maybe shielded from some of the noise, I suppose. They're not. If the stronghold on their own traditions and customs, but also distance from those trying to, wipe those out.
Pushing hegemonic ideas.
Yeah, supposedly. Although, not to say that it's as strong here in the U.S. I have a very strong memory in third grade, my friends and I building this insane fairy house. We brought stuff from home.
This is a big pastime for me as well.
Yes, but the recess teacher made us destroy it because it was on school grounds, and we had brought so much stuff from home. I remember feeling so anguished.
That's devastating.
Did you get photos of it and then convince a famous author to...
that it was a real fairy castle?
That I can never tell.
Since we're talking about childhood fairy fascination experiences, did anyone else engage at all with the Cicely Mary Barker Flower Fairies illustrated collection?
Oh, maybe.
Are those the ones that were my sister loved these books, if it is the same. It's a massive series, and they're really thin books, and on the front it's it's always a glittery fairy, and they all have different
Magic.
name.
Oh, this is a different one.
Oh, okay.
Rainbow Magic.
But those were big. Those were big. No, she was, I think, born around turn of the century, 1900. Presumably got working a little later than that because she was a baby then. But it was these very cherubic little child fairies who would each had a flower or plant that they would sort of stand next to. And they were always dressed in clothing made from that flower. So like the
that's cool.
peony fairy would have a little peony outfit.
Is this it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I
they're
know
very angelic cherubic. Like these are if we're going like devil or god, these are like little
Yes,
baby
I've seen
angel
those.
fairies. And they each had a little saccharine poem. And
Oh my
I was
gosh.
obsessed with them. I loved them, and I would go through kind of like trading cards and like pick my favorites. So I was like, okay, the Willow Fairy, she rules. Like Weeping Willow Fairy, my girl. Poppy Fairy, rad. There's one who I'm blanking out on, but was on like hanging on to a yellow leaf, kind of very swashbuckling. She seemed like she was having fun.
Yeah.
I was just really invested in creating inner lives for these characters.
I love that.
When we think of like about media for young girls, that the happy ending is not love or attached to like a man, these fairy stories, I mean, that was kind of the rare place where her identity and her pursuit, whether it was, you know, the rainbow, whatever it was, if it was like primitive or very like advanced, like it was just all, or even like Pixie Hollow, or, I mean, I think, but you know, Tinkerbell, she was just with her friends, like they were having a good time. I'm like, that's so cool.
Something I like about a lot of fairies is that they feature in stories, and they do a lot of stuff, but a lot of fairy stories are like, here's this weird little guy, here's his deal, here's what she wears, and here's where she hangs out, and you do what you will with that.
Yeah.
And you get to imagine. It prompts you to be very imaginative.
It does. You sort of fill in you colour it in yourself, don't you? Which I think, as a child especially, that's just the coolest thing. You can make it. You can take something and make it whatever you want. Yeah. Oh, it's been so much fun.
Yeah.
It's been a delight.
Thanks for having
you
us
for us as
back.
well, yeah.
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
No, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Ladies of Lore, and a huge, huge thank you to RPG Major for yet again blessing all of our ears with their incredible talent. Guys, you are honestly so amazing. I'm blown away yet again. I just sit here the whole time and I'm like, oh my God, what's happening? How is this happening to me? But please, if you've enjoyed this episode, I really, really compel you to go and check out RPG Major's podcast, where there are quite literally tons of episodes just like this one, but with interesting characters and storylines. Where can everybody find you guys other than on the podcast platforms?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram at RPG Major, Blue Sky at RPG Major.
We have a Discord where you can share thoughts about the show, share things you noticed about how we incorporated details from our previous Ladies of Lore episodes, like current viewers have been doing, which is very fun. They've all
That's
been
amazing.
noticing.
They can share memes and or theories.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
We've recently launched a Patreon, though why you would go there before you listen to our podcast, I have no
You're
idea.
feeling punchy. We
Do it
double dog
because I
dare
told you to do it. Do it because we said we'll do it.
But we encourage all of your listeners who've not gone on to the Ladies of Lore Patreon. I've been enjoying reading some of the additional things that you've been putting out
Thank
on
you
there
so much.
as well. And it's if you're in a position where you've got the money to spare to support someone who's doing work that you love, to me, it seems like it's a no-brainer. So head over to the Ladies of Lore Patreon
Yeah. Weekly scroll.
and help us keep learning about these, because India, as I was recently walking from a train stop to my sister's wedding, I literally stopped under a bridge to sort of stay out of the sun for a minute longer, and because I was so close to the end of listening to your Cinderella episode, I was like, I'm gonna hear the end of this.
Yep.
Yeah, just don't want to like shift spaces without hearing the end of where that was. So
Oh, thank you so much.
support captivating storytelling. Go to the Ladies of Lore Patreon. Do it. India's not the only one telling you to.
Please go and listen to RPG Major, because it's honestly, I think I said this on the first episode we did together. My little nerd brain was like, whoa, it's everything that I love. It's all my special interests. It's musical theatre. It's nerdy stuff. It's RPG stuff. It's all everything. It's everything. They've got everything you need. Everything you need. Compelling storytelling, amazing characters. It's just really cute. It's like feel good. It's really, really feel good. And I did put it on for someone once, and they were like, "Oh, this is just really cozy, isn't it?" And if you like, it's just cozy, and it's just such good vibes. And sometimes I think you need that, especially in this day and age. Sometimes you do need to just, like you said at the start, listen to something kind and fun and cozy. So, yeah. We're just bigging each other up. It's just like,
Yeah.
you know, you're the best.
If you go do both, you get a special prize.
Yeah, you get eternal love and gratitude from all of us. From all of us. But let us know in the comments if your podcast platform actually allows that, because they don't all allow it, what you think. If you're ever in the Discord server on the Patreon, leave me a little comment. Let us know what you think if you enjoyed the episode. And I'll be back next time to unravel another thread in the rich tapestry of women in mythology and folklore.
In the looking glass.
I don't know about that one. Maybe I'll make it in. I don't know.
You're on content.
Well, I loved it. Well, I thought it was great. Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Steam weird spoken bridge.
You just have to roll with it. You just have to just go where it takes you, man. Just go where it takes you.
And sometimes you start going, you're like, I'm sure I'll find a chorus by the time I get to the chorus time. And, sometimes it happens.
That's the beauty of improv.
It really is.
I couldn't do it. I'm like, my brain doesn't work quick enough. I have to have everything written down, and even sometimes I have to write down my own jokes and then read them like I've just made it up on the spot because I can't. I'm exposing myself.
Hey, Helix from the editing bay here. Just wanted to jump in to say something that I almost got out on air and just hesitated in saying for some reason. There's no magic to improv. You don't need a certain kind of brain, and you don't need to be someone who's always been funny. While it can feel like a magic trick when you're watching it, it's a skill like any other. If you're intimidated to try it, everyone else who's good at it tried it for the first time and was bad at it when they tried it for the first time. Like a lot of skills, some people are better at it when they start than others. Anyone who you see perform who's great at it has put in thousands and thousands of repetitions. It's like any other skill. So if you feel like it's something you want to try but you're intimidated, honestly, improv attracts some of the kindest people. It's inherently collaborative, and those who are best at it are the best listeners. For me, it's become a lovely place to build community. So if it's something that you're interested in but intimidated by, just give it a shot. If you want.